The Thessari Empire and the Human Alliance are negotiating new military cooperation treaty. Extensive agreement designed to strengthen their alliance relationship and improve coordination between their respective defense forces. The treaty negotiations have been ongoing for 18 months, involving dozens of working groups addressing various aspects of military cooperation, joint training exercises, intelligence sharing protocols, command structure integration for combined operations, technology transfer agreements, coordination procedures for responding to security threats affecting alliance space. Most of the treaty provisions are technical and straightforward, defining which information will be shared, establishing procedures for joint operations, creating frameworks for cooperation that build on existing alliance military relationships. But one provision proves unexpectedly contentious during negotiations. Article 47, subsection 12. The clause requires meaningful integration of personnel between Thessari and human military forces. The alliance integration advocates argue that true cooperation requires officers from each military to actually serve embedded within the other's command structure, to understand each other's operational culture from inside rather than just coordinating from separate institutional positions. Thessari military leadership opposes this provision strongly. The Thessari Imperial Guard is an ancient institution with traditions and protocols developed over millennia. Having foreign officers embedded within their command structure would disrupt those traditions, would require accommodating different cultural expectations and training backgrounds, would compromise the unity and discipline that make the Imperial Guard effective. Human military leadership is similarly resistant. Embedding Thessari officers within human command structures would create complications about authority, would require navigating different military cultures, would potentially compromise operational security if Thessari officers have access to sensitive human military planning. But the provision has political support from alliance diplomatic leadership, who see personnel integration as an important symbol of deepening cooperation. After months of negotiation, compromise language is reached. Article 47, subsection 12 will require that one human military officer be assigned to serve embedded within the Thessari Imperial Guard for 1-year term, and reciprocally, one Thessari officer be assigned to human military command structure for equivalent period. Just one officer each way. Limited duration. Specific assignment details to be determined by each military's leadership. The compromise satisfies alliance integration advocates who wanted substantive personnel exchange while minimizing the actual disruption to either military's operations. Everyone involved in drafting the treaty understands that this provision is largely ceremonial, token exchange of liaison officers who will observe some training exercises, attend some briefings, participate in some joint planning sessions, and then return to their respective forces after the year concludes. The human officer assigned to Thessari Imperial Guard will have no real authority over Thessari personnel, no actual command responsibilities, no meaningful impact on how the Guard operates. Similarly, the Thessari officer assigned to human military will be observer and advisor rather than commander. It's symbolic gesture toward cooperation that can be easily contained and easily forgotten once the 1-year assignment concludes. Both militaries can claim they're complying with the treaty's integration requirements without actually changing how they operate or compromising their institutional cultures. The treaty is finalized and signed with appropriate ceremony. Article 47, subsection 12 receives minimal attention in the formal proceedings, just one provision among hundreds, notable mainly for the political compromise it represents rather than for any expectation that it will meaningfully affect military operations. After the treaty enters into force, both militaries begin the process of selecting which officers to assign for the embedded exchange program. Queen Serafina personally oversees the Thessari selection of which human officer will be assigned to the Imperial Guard. Not because she expects the assignment to matter significantly, but because the Imperial Guard reports directly to the sovereign, and because having foreign officer embedded in the palace requires her explicit approval. Her military advisors recommend selecting mid-ranking officer with unremarkable service record, someone competent enough that the assignment doesn't insult human military, but not so distinguished that they'll have strong opinions or demand significant authority. The ideal candidate should be professional enough to perform liaison duties adequately, while being forgettable enough that their presence doesn't disrupt Imperial Guard operations or create complications requiring ongoing management attention. After reviewing several potential candidates submitted by human military leadership, Serafina selects Sergeant David Chen. His service record is exactly what her advisors recommended. Solid, unremarkable, professionally competent without being exceptional. 15 years in human military service. Infantry background with experience in various operational deployments. Performance evaluations consistently describe him as reliable, professional, competent. Positive but generic assessments, suggesting he performs his duties adequately without particular distinction. His rank is appropriate, senior non-commissioned officer, not so junior that the assignment seems dismissive, but not so senior that he'll expect significant command authority. His specialization is general enough that he can reasonably observe various Imperial Guard functions, without requiring access to highly classified or sensitive operations. Perfect selection for assignment meant to satisfy treaty requirement while remaining easily contained. His presence will be temporary, 1 year embedded with Imperial Guard observing training and operations, then return to human military with the assignment becoming footnote in both their records. Serafina approves the selection with minimal discussion. David Chen will arrive at the Thessari Imperial Palace in 6 weeks to begin his 1-year embedded assignment with the Imperial Guard. What neither Serafina nor her military advisors anticipate is that unremarkable service record doesn't mean unremarkable person. That professional competence sometimes masks qualities that don't show up in performance evaluations, but that matter profoundly when someone is placed in an environment built on assumptions they don't share. That sometimes the most transformative presence is the one nobody expected to matter. The selection is meant to be symbolic. One human soldier chosen to satisfy clause no one expects to matter, gesture toward cooperation, easily contained, easily forgotten. His record is unremarkable, his presence temporary. That is the mistake. David arrives at the Thessari Imperial Palace 6 weeks after his selection is finalized. He's provided quarters in section of the palace designated for foreign personnel, comfortable accommodations separate from where Imperial Guard members are housed, maintaining the distinction between actual Guard members and the foreign observer, satisfying treaty requirements. He receives formal orientation from Commander Kethara, captain of the Imperial Guard, who explains the basic structure of Thessari military hierarchy, the protocols governing behavior within the palace, and the parameters of David's observer assignment. You will be permitted to observe training exercises, attend command briefings when appropriate, and participate in selected joint planning sessions. Kethara explains with professional courtesy that barely conceals her view that this entire exchange program is diplomatic nuisance. You will not have command authority over Imperial Guard personnel. You will not be included in discussions involving classified security matters or operational planning, beyond what the treaty specifically requires. Your role is to observe and to provide liaison between Imperial Guard and human military leadership regarding cooperation protocols, she continues. Questions about what you observe should be directed to designated liaison officers rather than to operational commanders. Your presence should minimize disruption to normal Guard operations. David listens attentively, asks clarifying questions about practical matters like daily schedule and reporting procedures, and confirms his understanding of the assignment parameters. He begins his observer duties the following day, attending morning training exercises where Imperial Guard members drill in combat techniques and tactical procedures, sitting in on briefings where commanders discuss security arrangements and operational planning, observing the daily routines that constitute the Guard's peacetime operations. The Thessari officers and guards who interact with David treat him with formal courtesy, acknowledging his presence, answering basic questions, providing explanations when his observer role requires understanding context. But the courtesy is distant, maintaining clear distinction between him and actual Guard members. He's foreign observer satisfying diplomatic requirement, not genuine member of the Guard. Someone to be polite to while minimizing his actual involvement in anything significant. David doesn't challenge this treatment, doesn't demand greater inclusion or protest being marginalized. Just performs his assigned observer role professionally, takes notes during briefings, watches training exercises with apparent interest, asks occasional questions about procedures he's observing. Exactly what everyone expected from someone selected specifically for being unremarkable and unlikely to cause complications. But within the first 2 weeks, subtle irregularities begin appearing in David's behavior. Nothing dramatic or confrontational, just small deviations from how foreign observers are supposed to act within the rigid hierarchical system of the Imperial Guard. During a training exercise, David notices junior guards struggling with equipment malfunction. The Thessari protocol would be for senior guards to address such issues while maintaining hierarchical distance. But David, without apparent awareness that he's violating protocol, walks over and helps the junior guard fix the problem, not taking over, just offering assistance as though helping a colleague is natural rather than inappropriate crossing of hierarchical boundaries. The junior guard is visibly uncomfortable with this attention from foreign observer, uncertain how to respond to help from someone outside the command structure. But David's manner is so matter-of-fact and lacking in condescension that the guard accepts the assistance rather than refusing it. Senior guards watching the interaction show confusion. Is this breach of protocol that should be corrected, or is the foreign observer exempt from normal hierarchical expectations? Similar incidents accumulate. David thanks palace servants for their work, actually makes eye contact, acknowledges their service with genuine appreciation rather than treating them as invisible functional elements of the palace system. Thessari protocol is that servants maintain lowered eyes and minimal interaction with military personnel, especially with anyone associated with the Imperial Guard. But David seems unaware of this protocol, or perhaps aware but unwilling to follow it. He treats everyone, commanders, guards, servants, administrative staff, with same calm, consistent respect, as though their rank and position don't determine whether they deserve acknowledgement as people. This behavior is puzzling to Thessari personnel. Foreign observers should either adopt Thessari protocols to show respect for their culture, or should maintain distant formality appropriate for diplomatic guests. Instead, David does neither. He's not performing Thessari hierarchy, but he's also not maintaining diplomatic distance. He's just treating everyone like normal people deserving basic courtesy. After 3 weeks, during a command briefing about guard rotation schedules, David asks his first question that exposes the real problem with his presence. Commander Kethara, I noticed the standard rotation schedule requires 16-hour duty shifts for perimeter guards. What's the tactical reasoning behind that duration, rather than shorter rotations that might maintain higher alertness? The question is asked with genuine curiosity, with tone suggesting David actually wants to understand the Thessari approach rather than criticizing it. But the question itself is inappropriate. Foreign observers don't question Imperial Guard protocols. They observe and learn. They might ask clarifying questions about what they're seeing, but they don't ask why the guard does things certain ways. That implies the protocols might not be optimal, that there might be better alternatives. Cathara's response is carefully controlled. The 16-hour rotation is traditional protocol that has served the Imperial Guard effectively for centuries. Guards are trained to maintain alertness for extended periods. David nods, apparently accepting this explanation, but then follows up. I understand it's traditional. I'm curious about the original tactical reasoning. Was it designed around specific threat assessment, or around demonstrating endurance as part of guard culture, or some other consideration? Now the question becomes more problematic, because Cathara doesn't actually know the original reasoning. The 16-hour rotation exists because it's always existed, because it's what Imperial Guard training teaches, because changing it would suggest weakness or insufficient discipline. But David's question, asked without accusation, with authentic desire to understand, exposes that no one has actually examined whether the protocol serves tactical purpose, or whether it's just tradition maintained because questioning tradition isn't done. The rotation schedule has proven effective over centuries of implementation. Cathara responds more stiffly. That effectiveness is sufficient justification. David accepts this answer without pushing further. But the question lingers in the room. Other officers present at the briefing are now thinking about something they've never questioned before. Does the 16-hour rotation actually serve tactical purpose, or is it just tradition? If someone asked them to justify it beyond, because that's how we've always done it, could they? That's when the Thessari command structure begins to realize that David Chen might be more disruptive than his unremarkable service record suggested. Over the following weeks, David's questions multiply. Never confrontational, never directly critical, just genuine inquiries seeking to understand the reasoning behind Thessari Imperial Guard protocols. Lord Vethros, the standing orders specify that guards are forbidden from sitting during their duty hours even when no immediate threat exists, and when their assigned post is secured area with no tactical requirement for standing alertness. What's the security reasoning behind that requirement? Why are servants required to keep their eyes lowered when senior officers pass? Does that protocol serve some security function I'm not understanding, or is it cultural tradition separate from tactical considerations? The formal protocols require that junior guards wait for senior guards to finish speaking before responding to questions, even during tactical briefings where rapid information exchange might be important. How does that communication hierarchy enhance operational effectiveness? Each question is reasonable on its surface. Each is asked with respect rather than challenge. But collectively, they expose something the Thessari command structure has never had to confront. Many of their protocols exist not because they serve tactical or security purposes, but because they reinforce hierarchical distance, and because questioning them would suggest weakness. David isn't trying to reform Thessari military culture. He's genuinely trying to understand it, approaching it with the same analytical curiosity he would bring to understanding any unfamiliar system. But his questions force Thessari officers to articulate justifications for protocols they've never examined, to defend practices that exist primarily because they've always existed. And when the officers provide explanations that amount to because it's traditional or because it demonstrates discipline, David nods and accepts these answers without argument. But his acceptance makes the inadequacy of those explanations more obvious rather than less. Simultaneously, David continues treating everyone in the palace with the same unguarded consistency that disrupts Thessari social hierarchies. He learns the names of palace servants who work in his section of the building, actually learns them and uses them, greeting servants by name when he encounters them, rather than treating them as anonymous functionaries. Thessari protocol is that servants don't have names in formal contexts. They have functions and positions, but personal names are inappropriate for use by military or noble personnel, because names imply individual identity rather than functional role. But David, apparently unaware of or unconcerned by this protocol, treats servants as people with identities worth knowing and acknowledging. When a servant drops a tray of dishes in the hallway, creating mess that would normally be handled by the servant alone while others ignore the incident, David helps clean up, not supervising or directing, just kneeling and helping pick up broken pieces, as though helping someone who dropped something is normal behavior rather than violation of hierarchical protocol. The servant is mortified. Foreign observer associated with imperial guard shouldn't be performing servant tasks, shouldn't be acknowledging the servant's existence beyond maybe expressing displeasure at the noise and disruption. But David's manner is so matter-of-fact and lacking in performance that the servant has no framework for responding, except to accept the help and thank him, despite this being entirely outside normal social protocols. Junior guards and lower-ranking administrative personnel start responding differently to David than they do to Thessari officers. When David asks questions about their work or their experiences, they answer more openly than they would with Thessari superiors, because David's manner doesn't carry the implicit threat that exists in hierarchical military cultures, where honesty might be punished if it reveals problems or criticisms. After 2 months, Commander Kethara reports to Queen Seraphina about developments with the human observer assignment. Your Majesty, Sergeant Chen is creating unexpected complications. He's not violating any explicit protocols. His behavior is within the technical parameters of his observer assignment, but his presence is having disruptive effects on guard culture and palace operations. What kind of disruptions? Seraphina asks. He asks questions that expose assumptions in our protocols without directly challenging them, Kethara explains. He treats servants and junior personnel with familiarity that violates hierarchical distance. He helps people in ways that cross rank boundaries. None of this is aggressive or insubordinate. It's all framed as cultural ignorance or innocent assistance. But it's causing lower-ranking personnel to respond to him differently than they respond to actual guard command structure. Are his questions reasonable? Seraphina inquires. Are his interactions with personnel inappropriate or just unusual? The questions are reasonable on their surface, Kethara admits, and his interactions are polite rather than inappropriate. That's part of the problem. We can't address the disruption by correcting specific violations because he's technically not violating anything. He's just behaving as though hierarchical protocols don't apply to him, and his behavior is causing others to question protocols they've never questioned before. Give me examples, Seraphina directs. Kethara provides several recent incidents. David asking why guards can't sit during long duty shifts when no tactical requirement exists for standing. David helping servant who dropped supplies rather than ignoring the incident. David learning and using names of lower-ranking personnel in ways that treat them as individuals rather than as functional roles. What concerns me most, Kethara concludes, is that junior guards and servants are beginning to expect acknowledgement and courtesy from command structure because the human observer provides it. They're starting to question why Thessari officers treat them with less respect than foreign observer does. The hierarchical distance that discipline requires is being compromised. Seraphina considers this. Has Sergeant Chen's presence compromised operational effectiveness or security? Not measurably, Kethara concedes. The guard continues functioning at normal efficiency, but the cultural cohesion and unquestioning obedience that hierarchical discipline creates are being eroded. Personnel are thinking about protocols rather than just following them. That's dangerous to long-term institutional integrity, even if it hasn't caused immediate operational problems. Continue monitoring the situation, Serafina directs. But don't take action against Sergeant Chen unless he violates specific protocols. If the problem is that his presence exposes weaknesses in our hierarchical culture, perhaps those weaknesses deserve examination. After Kethara departs, Serafina reflects on what she's hearing. The human soldier selected specifically for being unremarkable is somehow disrupting an institution that has maintained rigid protocols for millennia. Not through rebellion or direct challenge, but through authentic behavior that treats dignity as universal rather than as privilege allocated by rank. She decides to observe David directly rather than relying solely on reports from her commanders. Serafina begins attending some of the command briefings where David observes, watching how he interacts with Imperial Guard personnel and how they respond to him. What she observes confirms Kethara's reports while also revealing nuances that the reports missed. David asks questions, but the questions aren't challenges. They're genuine attempts to understand. When officers explain that protocols exist because they're traditional or because they demonstrate discipline, David accepts these explanations without argument. But his acceptance somehow makes the inadequacy of those justifications more visible rather than less. He treats everyone consistently, the same respectful tone whether speaking to Commander Kethara or to junior guard or to palace servant. Not performing equality or making political statement, just genuinely unable to modulate his treatment of people based on their rank, because that modulation apparently doesn't exist in his behavioral framework. Most striking is what happens in David's presence that doesn't happen in normal guard operations. People speak more honestly. Junior personnel answer questions more fully. Servants make eye contact. Guards admit when they don't understand something rather than pretending competence. The hierarchical distance that Thessari military culture maintains through implicit threat, the understanding that showing weakness or questioning superiors brings punishment, doesn't function properly with David because he doesn't carry that threat. He asks questions that assume the person he's speaking to has valuable knowledge rather than assuming they should simply obey without understanding. After observing several briefings, Serafina requests private meeting with David. Sergeant Chen, I've been reviewing reports about your assignment with the Imperial Guard. You're creating interesting effects on our institutional culture. I apologize if I've caused problems, Your Majesty. David responds with genuine concern. I've tried to follow protocols and to minimize disruption to guard operations. You haven't violated protocols, Serafina clarifies, but you're disrupting institutional culture nevertheless. I'm curious whether that disruption is intentional or accidental. Accidental, Your Majesty, David says honestly. I'm just trying to understand how the Imperial Guard operates and to perform my observer duties professionally. If I'm causing problems, I'd appreciate specific guidance about what I should change. The problem, if it is a problem, is that you treat everyone the same way, Serafina observes. You don't modulate your behavior based on rank or status. You ask questions as though understanding matters more than obedience. You acknowledge people's individual identities rather than just their functional roles. In hierarchical culture like ours, that behavior is disruptive regardless of your intentions. I understand that Thessari culture values hierarchy more than human military culture does, David acknowledges. But I'm not sure how to change my basic behavior to accommodate that beyond following the explicit protocols I've been taught. Should I stop asking questions about things I don't understand? Should I ignore servants and junior personnel to maintain appropriate distance? Those changes would reduce the disruption, Serafina confirms, but I'm not certain I want to require them. Because what you're exposing through your authentic behavior is interesting. You're revealing that our hierarchical protocols depend on people not questioning them, that our discipline requires distance and fear rather than understanding and willing cooperation. Your presence is uncomfortable for my command structure, she continues, because you act as if dignity is universal rather than something allocated based on status. And when lower-ranking personnel experience that treatment from you, they start wondering why their own commanders don't treat them similarly. That's undermining the hierarchical distance that our military culture assumes is necessary for discipline and effectiveness. I'm sorry, Your Majesty, David says. I genuinely don't know how to treat people as though they don't deserve basic respect. That's not how I was raised or trained. If that's incompatible with Imperial Guard culture, perhaps I'm not the right person for this assignment. You're exactly the right person for this assignment, Serafina responds, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. Not for the purposes I intended when I selected you. You're not easily contained or easily forgotten as I assumed you would be, but for purposes I'm only now beginning to understand. I don't follow, Your Majesty. Systems built on fear and distance are brittle, Serafina explains. They function smoothly when no one questions them, but they can't adapt when circumstances require change, because adaptation requires honest assessment and hierarchical cultures punish honesty that reveals weaknesses. Your presence is straining our protocols because you refuse to behave as expected, not through rebellion, but through authentic consistency that doesn't recognize hierarchy as justification for treating people as less than human. What I'm watching ripple outward from your presence, she continues, is subtle reorientation of my empire. Protocols bending as commanders struggle to answer questions about why they do things certain ways. Loyalties shifting as personnel respond to being treated with respect. Accountability replacing silence because you ask about reasoning rather than just accepting orders. What unsettles me most isn't your influence. It's how little effort it requires, Serafina admits. You're not leading revolution. You're not issuing demands. You're just being yourself consistently, and that consistency exposes brittleness in systems that depend on never questioning their own assumptions. I'm going to extend your assignment beyond the 1 year specified in the treaty, Serafina decides. And I'm going to expand your role beyond observer. You'll serve as advisor on cultural integration and on how hierarchical protocols affect operational effectiveness. Because what you're teaching my empire isn't military cooperation as the treaty intended. What you're teaching is that power structures can be reshaped by a single individual who acts as if dignity is universal and never asks permission to believe it. That's systemic change I didn't anticipate when I selected unremarkable human soldier to satisfy ceremonial clause, she concludes. But it's change my empire needs, even if accepting it requires confronting uncomfortable truths about how we've maintained control through fear and distance rather than through genuine loyalty and understanding. She selected a human soldier at random, never expecting him to reshape her entire empire. The selection meant to be symbolic, easily contained, easily forgotten, his record unremarkable, his presence temporary. That was the mistake. He didn't challenge laws directly, didn't issue demands or rally crowds. He asked questions where obedience was assumed,